lot of people call me a justice architect.
Ooh, a justice architect. Sounds all superhero-y.
But I don't design prisons. I don't design jails. I don't design detention centers, and I don't even design courthouses.
Well, I didn't imagine that a justice architect would do any of those things. Those things would be done by a real architect, which, according to our speaker's LinkedIn profile, she is. Deanna Van Buren has a Bachelor of Science in Architecture and a Master's in Architecture to boot. But, all right, you don't design the buildings commonly associated with our criminal justice system. So, do tell, how do you design the abstract?
All the same, I get a call every week saying, okay, but you design better prisons, right?
Right?
You get a call every week asking if you design better prisons. I totally believe you.
And I always pause. And I invite them, and I invite you today, to imagine a world without prisons. What does that justice feel and look like? What do we need to build to get there? I'd like to show you some ideas today of things that we're building. And I'm going to start with an early prototype. This I built when I was 5. I call it the Healing Hut.
The Healing Hut. So, an enclosure in which someone can be rehabilitated? Go on.
And I built it after I got sent home from school for punching this kid in the face because he called me the N-word, okay? He deserved it.
He deserved it. So, you answered being verbally insulted with physical violence. You didn't settle your differences peacefully to come to an understanding with the other kid. Got it.
It happened a lot, though, because my family had desegregated a white community in rural Virginia. And I was really scared. I was afraid. I was angry.
Your family desegregated a town, and you were afraid, scared, and angry. At 5 years old? And this happened a lot. What happened a lot? You punching other kids in the face?
And so I would run into the forest and I would build these little huts. They were made out of twigs and leaves and blankets I'd taken from my mom. And as the light would stream into my refuge, I would feel at peace.
So you punched a kid in the face over being called a bad word, and then you willfully separated yourself from the rest of society in an isolated enclosure until such time as your anger and violent urges had subsided. Got it.
Despite my efforts to comfort myself, I still left my community as soon as I could, and I went to architecture school, and then into a professional career designing shopping centers, homes for the wealthy, and office buildings.
Okay, maybe it's just me, but when she qualifies that she designed homes for the wealthy, it almost sounds like a point of spitefulness.
Until I stepped into a prison for the first time. It was the Chester State Correctional Institution in Pennsylvania, and my friend, she invited me there to work with some of her incarcerated students and teach them about the positive power of design. The irony is so obvious, right?
Right.
As I approached this concrete building, these tiny little windows, barbed wire, high walls, observation towers, and on the inside, these cold, hard spaces. Little lighter air. The guards are screaming, the doors are clanking. There's a wall of cells filled with so many black and brown bodies.
Ah, so you're going to be making this about race. Got it. And it's a prison, not Club Med. Had our speaker never seen a prison before, either on television or in the movies? Was its design really all that of a revelation to her?
And I realized that what I was seeing was the end result of our racist policies that had caused mass incarceration.
Ah, so the architect walks into a prison and immediately assesses the criminal justice system as inherently racist. That all of the black and brown bodies are not in there because they have committed crimes, but were merely rounded up and incarcerated, having gone through no due process because of their race, thanks to mass incarceration. Got it.
But as an architect, what I was seeing was how a prison is the worst building type we could have created to address the harm that we're doing to one another.
The harm that we are doing to one another. That is an odd way of saying the harm that criminals do to innocent victims.
I thought, well, could I design an alternative to this other than building a prettier prison? It didn't feel good to me. It still doesn't feel good.
It doesn't feel good to you. Well, I would recommend asking the victims and the families of victims of crime what their feelings on the subject are.
But back then, I just didn't know what to do. What do we build instead of this? And then I heard about restorative justice.
Ah, so is this your design of a modern healing hut? A kumbaya circle?
Here was an alternative system that says when a crime is committed, it is a breach of relationship, that the needs of those who have been harmed must be addressed first, that those who have committed the offense have an obligation to make amends. And what they are really intense dialogues where all stakeholders come together to find a way to repair the breach.
How does a con man repair the relationship breach of destroying another person's life savings? How does a rapist repair the relationship breach with their victim? How does a murderer repair the relationship breach with those who have been left behind? I am all ears.
Early data shows that restorative justice builds empathy, that it reduces violent reoffending by up to 75%, that it eases PTSD in survivors of the most severe violence. And because of these reasons, we see prosecutors and judges and district attorneys starting to divert cases out of court and into restorative justice so that some people never touch the system altogether.
Would you care to cite any of the studies supporting your claims? No? Okay.
And so I thought, well, damn, why aren't we designing for this system? Instead of building prisons, we should be building spaces to amplify restorative justice. And so I started in schools because suspensions and expulsions have been fueling the pathway to prison for decades.
Ah, yes, the school to prison pipeline. Being punished in school for breaking the rules or for harming others is a failing of the school and not a misdeed undertaken by the individual. And thus, criminal behavior in adulthood isn't a matter of personal responsibility, but rather a result of schools having been too mean. Got it.
So my first project, I just turned this dirty little storage room into a peacemaking room for a program in a high school in my hometown of Oakland. And after we were done, the director said that the circles she was holding in this space were more powerful in bringing the community together after fighting in school and gun violence in the community, and that students and teachers started to come here just because they saw it as a space of refuge.
A refuge from meaningful consequence, perhaps?
So what was happening is that the space was amplifying the effects of the process.
Is there any data to back up that claim that you would like to mention? No? Okay.
Okay, then I did something that architects always do, y'all. I was like, I'm going to build something massive now, right?
Right?
I'm going to build the world's first restorative justice center all by myself. And it's going to be a beautiful figure on the skyline, like a beacon in the night. Thousands of people will come here instead of going to court. I will single-handedly end mass incarceration and win lots of design awards.
Yeah. That is a funny notion, isn't it?
And then I checked myself. Because here's the deal. We are incarcerating more of our citizens per capita than any country in the world. And the fastest growing population there are Black women.
Ooh, a chart. Finally, a chart that has no citation of source. Got it. And the fastest growing population in prisons is Black women. Are you going to cite any proof of that claim? No? Okay. But, okay, let's say our speaker is absolutely correct. And so the reason she points that out is because of what? Or is this another example of the God of the gaps method of statistical presentation? A claim is tossed out into the ether with the hope that your audience will assume the conclusion that you want them to?
95% of all these folks are coming home. And most of them are survivors of severe sexual, physical, and emotional abuse. They have literally been on both sides of the harm.
Both sides of the harm. Okay, well, prison life should indeed not be a vacation. But, in my opinion, neither should it be an inhumane torture chamber. Bad things do happen in prison, and even the worst of offenders should be afforded as much protection from undue harm as is possible. But if our speaker is looking for me to feel bad for those who have been on the inflicting side of harm, she has yet to make a convincing case of it.
So I thought, maybe I should ask them what we should build instead of prisons.
Yes. Ask the inmates how best to design their own prison. Oh, wait, sorry, not prison, their own healing hut. Got it.
So I returned with a restorative justice expert, and we started to run the country's first design studios with incarcerated men and women around the intersection of restorative justice and design.
Ah, intersection. My favorite. Do tell us of the rehabilitative efficacy of your fantastical feng shui.
And it was transformative for me. I saw all these people behind walls in a totally different way. These were souls deeply committed to their personal transformation and being accountable. They were creative. They were visionary.
Okay, for the sake of argument, I will stipulate to all of that. So, allowing for all of that, how does this make incarceration unnecessary again?
Danny is one of those souls. He's been incarcerated at San Quentin for 27 years for taking a life at the age of 21.
All right, he committed murder as an adult. Got it.
From the very beginning, He's been focused on being accountable for that act and doing his best to make amends from behind bars.
I would be really curious to know how one makes amends for murder outside of serving their full prison sentence. But our speaker never tells us.
He brought that work into a design for a community center for reconciliation and wellness. It was a beautiful design, right?
Right?
So it's this green campus filled with these circular structures for victim and offender dialogue. And when he presented the project to me, he started crying. He said, after being in the brutality of San Quentin for so long, we don't think reconciliation will happen.
Well, all right. How do you reconcile murder? But that aside, whatever the offense might be, what if the victim or victims have no interest in establishing a dialogue with the person who has harmed them or their loved ones? A dialogue is a two-way equation. Our speaker has gone on a long time weeping over the needs of the perpetrators. So, when do we hear about the needs of the victims?
This design is for a place that fulfills the promise of restorative justice. And it feels closer now. I know for a fact that just the visualization of spaces for restorative justice and healing are transformative. I've seen it in our workshops over and over again. But I think we know that just visualizing these spaces is not enough. We have to build them.
Show me data that says murderers and rapists and con artists, after having breach healing dialogues with their victims, leads to a low to no recidivism rate, and you might have my attention. Until then, I would respectfully decline allotting any tax dollars to building your glorified support circles.
And so I started to look for justice innovators. They are not easy to find, but I found one. I found the Center for Court Innovation. They were bringing Native American peacemaking practices into a non-Native community for the very first time in the United States. And I approached them and I said, okay, well, as you set up your process, could I work with the community to design a peacemaking center? And they said yes. Thank God, because I had no backup to these guys.
Ah, so you had no one backing you up. The only person you could find to go along with you was someone from a Native American peacemaking process. Okay, so I would have to assume then that the Native American communities in this country must have ridiculously low crime rates, given the prevalence of restorative justice programs that are a part of their culture. Oops, guess not.
The Near West Side Peacemaking Project is complete, and they are already running over 80 circles a year with a very interesting outcome, and that it is the space itself that's convincing people to engage in peacemaking for the very first time in their lives. Isabel and her daughter are some of those community members, and they had been referred to peacemaking to heal their relationship after a history of family abuse, sexual abuse, and other issues that they've been having in their own family and the community.
So, family therapy, not murderer and victim's family therapy. I am still waiting to hear how or if things like that actually happen, and whether they are at all successful.
And, Isabel didn't want to do peacemaking. She's like, well, this is just like going to court. What is this peacemaking stuff? But when she showed up, she was stressed, she was anxious. But when she got in, she kind of looked around, and she settled in, and she turned to the coordinator and said, I feel comfortable here, at ease. It's homey.
So, this is your world without prisons? People who commit sexual abuse in their family talk it out in a safe space and are then free to go about their business? How effective is restorative justice in curing sexual predators of their inclinations, I wonder?
Isabel and her daughter made a decision that day to engage and complete the peacemaking process. And today their relationship is transformed. They're doing really well and they're healing.
Okay, our speaker never clarifies whether Isabel was the one who was the victim of family abuse or one of the people inflicting family abuse. And if it is the former, well, isn't there supposed to be a dialogue with the offender in order to make all of this restorative justice supposedly work? Regardless, I have no way of knowing how to assess this happy outcome between Isabel and her daughter against the unknown circumstances that brought them there in the first place. So, this entire anecdote from our speaker has been meaningless. Got it.
So after this project, I didn't go into a thing where I'm going to make a huge peacemaking center. I did want to have peacemaking centers in every community. But then a new idea emerged. I was doing a workshop in Santa Rita Jail in California, and one of our incarcerated designers, Doug, said, yeah, repairing the harm, getting back on my feet, healing, really important. But the reality is, Deanna, when I get home, I don't have anywhere to go. I have no job. Who's going to hire me? I'm just going to end back here. And you know what? He's right.
He is only right if he chooses to commit more crimes. But by all means, provide work training and education in prisons and as transitional programs after being released. I truly do want people to come out of prison rehabilitated and given the chance to change their fate. But they have to change their fate. It is up to them.
Because 60 to 75% of those returning to their communities will be unemployed a year after their release. We also know if you can't meet your basic economic needs, you're going to commit crime. Any of us would do that.
Okay, again, I am not going to argue with the concept of job training while in prison or job placement programs for released prisoners. But I am still waiting for the argument that proves we do not need prisons. I'm also waiting for you to address the victims of crime.
Instead of building prisons, what we could build are spaces for job training and entrepreneurship. These are spaces for what we call restorative economics.
No. What you could do is have those programs available in prison, and those who make the choice to better themselves will reap the rewards after they have been released. Because what exactly is the alternative? You arrest a rapist and condemn them to attending a public job training center?
So located in East Oakland, California, Restore Oakland will be the country's first center for restorative justice and restorative economics.
Aha! So the city of Oakland will be closing all of its prisons. This restorative justice center will be replacing incarceration in Oakland? Is that what I am to understand?
So here's what we're going to do. We're going to gut this building, and we're going to turn it into three things. First, a restaurant called Colors.
Colors? Oh, man.
That will break the racial divide in the restaurant industry by training low-wage restaurant workers to get living wage jobs in fine dining. It does not matter if you have a criminal record or not.
All right. A restorative restaurant. And being that creating a successful and sustainable restaurant is such an easy task in most markets, I am sure it will be a runaway and perpetual success. But, okay, what else?
On the second floor, we have bright, open, airy spaces to support a constellation of activist organizations to amplify their cry of healthcare, not handcuffs, and housing is a human right.
So, an activism center for left-leaning causes and ideologies. Golly, sounds very inclusive. Got it. And lastly?
And third, the county's first dedicated space for restorative justice, filled with nature, color, texture, and spaces of refuge to support the dialogues here.
Well, it certainly sounds like a safe space. Heck, it almost sounds like a spa. And nothing says disincentivizing criminal behavior like the spa treatment.
This project breaks ground in just 2 months, and we have plans to replicate it in Washington, D.C., Detroit, New York, and New Orleans.
Oh, yeah, right on, sister. And, who is paying for all of this, exactly? Well, I guess I have to assume that it is all being funded by the money that would have been used on all of those prisons that are being closed in Oakland, right?
Right?
So you've seen 2 things we can build instead of prisons. And look, and the price point is better. For 1 jail, we can build 30 restorative justice centers. That is a better use of your tax dollars.
You still have not told us where the money is coming from. But, okay, setting that aside, all right, you know what? I'll just make it very plain if I have not done so previously. What about the victims of crime? How does putting a rape victim in front of their rapist to have a peaceful chat replace incarceration for the commission of the crime?
So I want to build all of these. But building buildings is a really heavy lift. It takes time. And what was happening in the communities that I was serving is we were losing people every week to gun violence and mass incarceration.
Were the people lost to gun violence killed by the same people being lost to incarceration by any chance? And it is really odd that you would seemingly equate people being killed with people being sent to prison.
We needed to serve more people and faster and keep them out of the system. And a new idea emerged from the community, one that was a lot lighter on its feet. Instead of building prisons, we could build villages on wheels.
Villages on wheels?
What is that? That is London.
It's called the Pop-Up Resource Village, and it brings an entire constellation of resources to isolated communities in the greater San Francisco area, including mobile medical, social services, and pop-up shops.
So, again, who is paying for all of this? And how does this eliminate prisons? And how does this reconcile murder?
And so what we're doing now is we're building this whole village with the community, starting with transforming municipal buses into classrooms on wheels that bring GED and high school education across turf lines. We will serve thousands of more students with this. We're creating mobile spaces of refuge for women released from jail in the middle of the night at their most vulnerable.
Oh, so men aren't deserving of a late-night refuge. Only women. Got it.
Next summer, the village will launch, and it pops up every single week, expanding to more and more communities as it goes. So look out for it.
Well, I don't need it, because I am not a criminal. And if I become the victim of a crime, I am calling the cops, not the village on wheels.
So, what do we build instead of prisons?
Oh, you can build a lot of things instead of prisons, but I am still waiting for the argument that prisons are not needed.
We've looked at three things: peacemaking centers, centers for restorative justice and restorative economics, and pop-up villages. But I'm telling you, I have a list a mile long. This is customized housing for youth transitioning out of foster care. These are reentry centers for women to reunite with their children. These are spaces for survivors of violence.
Oh, so these are spaces for survivors of violence, are they? So the violent, and the rapists, and the murderers get to enjoy the benefits of and occupy the same spaces as their victims. Got it.
These are spaces that address the root causes of mass incarceration, and not a single one of them is a jail or a prison.
Mass incarceration. That term really irritates me. As though people are simply being swept up off the streets in droves and tossed into prison without cause or due process. A term that is slipped into discussions like this as though the concept is accepted fact rather than taken for what it really is: a conspiracy theory.
Activist, philosopher, writer Cornel West says that justice is what love looks like in public.
Oh, so rapists and their victims should be walking down the street and holding hands. That is justice. Got it.
So with this in mind, I ask you one more time to imagine a world without prisons.
Wow.
And join me in creating all the things that we could build instead. Thank you.
Wow. Such enthusiasm over a utopian pipe dream. But then, utopian pipe dreams do have a tendency to attract the idealistic, the well-intentioned, and the short-sighted. It is a sad but true fact that the laws that we live by are a collective acknowledgement of the inevitability of human failings. Some people will steal, and rape, and murder. Laws and incarceration don't necessarily stop them from doing it in the first place, but they do attempt to stop them from doing it again. And at the very least, hopefully make someone think twice before taking the risk of committing a crime at all. So, in a world without prisons, someone is arrested and what? Taken to the nearest justice center to make sandwiches, staple signs together for the next activist rally, and then engage in group therapy? Committing a crime brings you nurturing and support at a brightly lit oasis, paid for by the tax dollars of those who would be the victims? If for taking another person's life, a remorseless murderer can expect a parachute of peacemaking, rather than a one-way trip to a concrete hell, then a world without prisons would truly be a world gone mad. As always, thank you for watching.